Matt Reeves' The Batman is one of the most anticipated comic book films in recent memory. While The Dark Knight is no stranger to big screen adaptations, this new film serves to be a rather unique depiction of the beloved superhero, promising to be a more noir-driven and psychological movie than anything in the Caped Crusaders catalogue. Although Reeves' film appears to be drawing influence from previous cinematic iterations of the character, blending the gritty realism of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy with the gothic stylized world of Tim Burton's films, it also seems to be a very fresh take on the long-standing hero, one rooted heavily in the thriller genre, taking inspiration from films such as Seven, Zodiac and Chinatown. But while it's true that Reeves' approach to bringing Bruce Wayne to life feels like a departure from the hero's previous cinematic endeavours, this movie is taking no shortage of inspiration from a number of seminal and beloved Batman comic books, and as such, by understanding and explaining all of these various stories, I think we can begin to explore what we can expect from both the Batman as a film and its eventual sequels and spin-off projects. So in this video, I want to break down all of the various comic books highlighted by Reeves, Robert Pattinson and other figures in the film's production that have significantly influenced this new depiction of the Caped Crusader, discuss each of their history and significance in the wider Batman mythos, and explore what these stories mean for the cinematic future of The Dark Knight. Before we continue though, just a quick reminder to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to Owen Likes Comics so you don't miss out on any future videos. In order to best understand all of the various influences behind Matt Reeves' Batman film, I think it's worth first quickly overviewing just how this project came to be. You see, in 2013, following the successful release of Warner Bros.' Man of Steel film, the company announced that actor Ben Affleck would portray the Dark Knight in its upcoming sequel, with the plan being to introduce Cavill's Man of Tomorrow with Affleck's Batman, and eventually build towards a Justice League film. As this was all going on though, Warner Bros. Was also in negotiations with Affleck to direct a standalone Batman film, which he would co-write with then DC Chief Creative Officer Geoff Johns. In subsequent interviews, Affleck and Johns would describe their vision for the film as being inspired by the 1992 comic book storyline Batman Nightfall, as well as Grant Morrison and Dave McKean's Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth. According to Johns and Affleck, the film was to focus on Deathstroke as the main antagonist, and see Bruce Wayne being trapped in Arkham Asylum, forcing the hero to confront his past and all of the various villains he may have encountered in the decades before his introduction in BVS. This plan, however, never came to fruition, partly fueled by the troubled behind-the-scenes production of Justice League and several ongoing personal struggles. Ben Affleck announced in January 2017 that he would no longer be directing the Batman film, and the following month it was confirmed that Matt Reeves, director of Cloverfield and the two most recent Planet of the Apes films, would instead take over the project. Soon after, Reeves began working on his own version of the screenplay, choosing to instead focus on a younger Batman in the early years of his vigilante career, as he ventures into Gotham's underworld to solve a series of murders by the mysterious Riddler, with this film now being set outside of the DC Extended Universe. Given that this movie would chronicle the early years of Bruce Wayne's career and the forging of the Batman persona, it's no surprise that Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One comic would serve as a major influence on the project. Batman Year One is a massively celebrated and seminal Batman comic, and one that has an incredibly special place in the Dark Knight's long-standing history. You see, following DC's universe-wide reboots Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, the company set out in telling a brand new canon origin story for the Caped Crusader, enlisting Miller and Mazzucchelli, who at the time were working together on a now iconic run on Daredevil for Marvel, to bring to life a gritty reimagining of the hero's early years. Coming off the heels of Miller's 4-issue dystopian epic The Dark Knight Returns, he and Mazzucchelli told this new origin story throughout the pages of Batman issue 404 to 407. Taking the framework originally established by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, Miller explored Bruce Wayne's life and psyche in the years following the death of his parents, as he begins his quest for vengeance and justice as the Dark Crusader of the Night. In contrast to all previous reimaginings of Batman's origin though, which predominantly focused on the hero being a larger-than-life figure, travelling around the world learning various martial arts, Miller stripped Bruce's training back to a minimum, instead painting him as an inexperienced and flawed person simply trying to make his city a better place. The book's story, mostly narrated through Bruce's internal monologue, sees him wage war on Gotham's criminal underworld, coming into conflict with high-profile mobsters like Carmine Falcone, build a long-standing alliance with figures like Jim Gordon, and first encounter Selina Kyle. Upon its release in the spring of 1987, Batman Year One proved to be an enormous success for DC Comics. In the years leading up to DC's relaunch with Crisis, the Batman title had slumped to selling only 75,000 copies per month. In comparison, the Year One storyline sold an average of 193,000 copies per issue, figures not seen for the Batman comic since the early 1970s. Not only did the story sell well though, but it was tremendously well received by fans and critics alike, becoming not only the definitive origin story for decades, but one that also had a significant impact on the hero's wider storytelling for years to come. In many ways, Year One very much served as the starting point for a new wave of more grounded and darker stories for the Caped Crusader, with the likes of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's The Long Halloween following in this style a decade later. Likewise, the comic has also had a noticeable impact on various cinematic adaptations of Batman 2, with the 1993 animated film Batman Mask of the Phantasm drawing heavily from it, in addition to Christopher Nolan's 2005 film Batman Begins. For Matt Reeves though, Batman Year One has been an essential text when creating his version of the world's greatest detective. This influence is evident when analysing many aspects of the Batman style, tone and setting. Reeves actually spoke of Year One's influence in an interview with Joe Blow, where he explained,
"I would say in terms of Year One, there was something in my deep dive of that where reading it gave me an answer to tone, and to a feasibility of concept. There's something in the comic where Bruce needs to go to the East End to kind of scope things out, and he puts a scar on his face, he's got this kind of bomber jacket he puts on, and a knitted cap. In the notes, Frank Miller wrote to Mazzucchelli, in this scene, it should look like Bruce has won the Travis Bickle lookalike contest. I came of age really on the era of movies that he was talking about. Taxi Driver, French Connection, those are the movies of my youth, and I kind of felt like it opened up that side too. The idea of doing a kind of gothic, neo-noir 70s movie. There was something about that comic book that brought out a lot of tones."
In particular, the movie's gritty depiction of Gotham City as a place being overrun by organised crime, sleaze and corruption feels very reminiscent of Miller and Mazzucchelli's own reimagining of Bruce's first year as a vigilante, embarking on a one-man crusade against the social ills that plagued not only the Gotham streets, but also that resulted in the death of his parents. Not only that, but Reeves' depiction of Bruce Wayne also feels very reminiscent of Year One, with Robert Pattinson's iteration of the character coming across as a broken and imperfect person who is yet to fully realise his potentials as a crime fighter, creating the Batman persona as a vehicle initially to exact vengeance, before evolving into a symbol of hope in order to truly save his city from the clutches of crime and corruption. Although the fingerprints of Batman Year One can be very much seen throughout the Batman's DNA, I'd actually argue that its spiritual successor, 1996's The Long Halloween, is a book that influenced Matt Reeves & Co.'s reinvention of the Caped Crusader just as much. The Long Halloween was very much designed to be a follow-up to Year One, with the book's creative team Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale being tasked by Batman group editor Archie Goodwin to develop a story in the same vein of Miller and Mazzucchelli's gritty origin. Seeking inspiration, Loeb pitched an idea to Mark Waid, proposing a story set in the early years of Batman's career in the same continuity as Year One, with Waid suggesting that Loeb focus it around the downfall of Harvey Dent and the origin story of Two-Face. As such, The Long Halloween would pick up sometime after Year One's conclusion, where Bruce, now growing into his role as Gotham's protector, works alongside Gordon and Catwoman to solve a series of murders occurring at the times of popular holidays. Beginning in June and running throughout Halloween, Christmas and beyond, the comic focuses on Batman's attempt to track down the holiday killer, while Harvey Dent, the city's respected district attorney and an ally in Batman's war on crime, is targeted by the warring Falcone and Maroni crime families, and ultimately scarred in the process, leading to him becoming the villainous Two-Face. Above all else, one thing that's always stood out about The Long Halloween to me is its murder mystery and noir style plot, with much of the comic being centred around the constant mystique of the holiday murders. Likewise, the series demonstrates the tragic nature of the corruption corruption at the heart of Gotham City, going as far as to show how the city's evils can corrupt even the best of people, showcased by the fall of Harvey Dent, both in his involvement in the Holiday murders and his transformation into Two-Face. Released as a 13-issue series throughout 1996 and 1997, The Long Halloween has often been considered one of the all-time great Batman comic book stories, and one that clearly showcases the detective and noir aspects of the character's status quo. And given its place as a spiritual follow-up to Batman Year One, it's unsurprising that Matt Reeves and the film's screenwriters would take plenty of ideas from this seminal comic book story. Specifically, The Long Halloween's focus on Gotham's criminal underworld, particularly in the feuding Falcone and Maroni families, Bruce's relationship with Catwoman, and the crime thriller style plot surrounding a mysterious killer targeting members of high-profile crime syndicates, all can be reflected in the film, with the Riddler's targeted attacks on various corrupt officials within Gotham taking the place of both Holiday and Harvey Dent. The success of The Long Halloween led to the creation of a sequel story, 1999's Batman Dark Victory, and this too has various elements adapted into the newest Batman motion picture. Set roughly 3 years into Batman's career, now with Dick Grayson by his side as Robin, the comic details the Dark Knight's attempts to solve a series of murders by a killer known as the Hangman, as Two-Face resurfaces and begins a gang war against the Falcone mob. While a focus on organised crime in Gotham and a mystery for Batman to solve not only continue the themes established in The Long Halloween, but also reflect the plot of the latest movie. However, where I think this story most mirrors that of Matt Reeves's is in its exploration of Bruce Wayne's humanity, as his vengeful war on crime slowly begins to isolate him and forces him to question his own ethics, with the psychology of Batman being a huge part of this story. Robin's role in the comic serves to be that of Bruce's anchor back to humanity, with the childhood optimism and hopefulness of the boy wonder reaffirming Bruce's faith in the world and his purpose as a vigilante. And although the character of Robin doesn't appear in the Batman, I do think this idea of a Dark Knight on the brink of losing his way, and only through the events of the story cementing his role as a symbol of hope, mirrors the larger ideas at play at the heart of Matt Reeves's project. Reeves would even go as far as to describe Dark Victory as being one of his personal favourite Batman stories, so it's unsurprising that his film would draw some of its influences from this beloved 14-issue limited series. The third story that Matt Reeves has commonly cited as a big inspiration on his version of Batman is actually somewhat of a lesser known and more obscure comic book, Darwyn Cooke's Batman Ego. Released in August of 2000 as a one-issue special, Ego is a deep dive into the psychology and the mind of Gotham's protector, exploring the Dark Knight's mental health and the trauma that Batman symbolises within Bruce Wayne's mind. Written and drawn by Cooke himself, the comic takes place in the aftermath of a violent crime spree by the Joker, where after Batman interrogates a henchman for the villain's location, the henchman out of fear takes his own life, with Batman being overwhelmed by guilt and sending him into a spiral of inner turmoil in the aftermath. Cooke uses this situation to essentially split the personas of Batman and Bruce Wayne apart, depicting them as two different entities and showcasing the constant tension between the inner child who watched his parents die and the fearsome gothic creature of the night that criminals and the wider world see him as. Throughout this story, Cooke perfectly balances the duality of Batman's warring identities and tells an incredibly rich story about the very real psychology behind the Caped Crusader. Both director Matt Reeves and the film's star Robert Pattinson have frequently discussed Ego's influence on their version of the hero, with the former stating at DC Fandom that,
"Because I wanted to get into the mindset of the character, and I wanted to think of the psychology, for me, I think one of the cool deep dive ones was Darwyn Cooke's Ego. He's confronting the beast that is Batman, and there's a kind of duality. I mean, there's a lot in what, he's trying to do in the story about him confronting the shadow side of himself. The degree to which you have self-knowledge, you're able to understand your motivations, but he's broken, Batman."
Likewise, Pattinson spoke at length about how Cooke's emotionally driven and introspective look at the mind of the Dark Knight hugely informed the way he approached playing the character. Combining this, Pattinson also spoke about how he took many ideas from Denny O'Neil's iteration of Batman, in particular his 1989 storyline, Batman Shaman. This story, featured in the pages of the Legends of the Dark Knight series, very much intertwines with the events of Year One, focusing on the early years of Batman's career while simultaneously flashing back to his years training around the world. Specifically, the comic reveals that Bruce spent time training as a detective in Alaska, where after failing to apprehend the serial killer Thomas Woodley, Bruce is attacked and left stranded in the wilderness. Facing death, he's eventually rescued by a group of Native Americans, and whilst in their care, he is healed by a shaman wearing a bat mask. In the present day, Batman investigates a series of murders being orchestrated by the cult of Chibala, discovering that one of the killers wore the same bat mask as the shaman in Alaska. After returning to Alaska seeking answers, Batman eventually discovers that Thomas Woodley, the man he had been searching for years earlier, was responsible for the killings, defeating him and ending the cult's reign of terror in the process. Not only is Shaman a standout detective story for the Caped Crusader, but I think what makes it resonate with Robert Pattinson so much is how the comic deconstructs the significance of the bat in the hero's mythos. Serving as a sequel comic to Year One, Denny O'Neil blended Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's gritty realism with themes of spirituality and religion, creating a story that dives deep into the symbolism within the Dark Knight and exploring what every facet of his well-crafted persona means. Pattinson explained how this story inspired his portrayal of Batman in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, where he stated,
"It's almost a dream state the whole time. I was like, oh, that hasn't really been touched on. There's a kind of mysticism to it. I was also thinking there's some kind of link when you look at like Viking warriors or something. You put on this outfit and you genuinely believe that you have power afterward. And I was thinking that Bruce kind of thinks that. It clears his mind so much to be in that suit that it actually gives him extrasensory abilities, even though ironically it's the opposite. Like, the reason that Batman is kind of separate from other superheroes is because he's a normal guy."
The other two comics that I think have had a major influence on the Batman story and characters are actually two of the more recent Batman runs, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank's Batman Earth 1 and Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's 0 Year story arc. Now, I won't dive too much into Earth 1 here, as I recently covered it in its own video, but there are several different aspects of Johns and Frank's reimagining of the Dark Knight's origin that feel like they've made their way into Matt Reeves' film. Mainly, the dynamic between Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne and Andy Serkis's Alfred reminds me a lot of how their relationship is depicted in Earth 1, particularly with this iteration of Alfred being far more hardened and capable than his traditional counterpart. Likewise, the Earth 1 books also focus on Bruce's attempts to fight corruption rife throughout Gotham's establishment and restore his parents' legacy, with Volume 2 in particular feeling like a strong influence on Reeves' film, as the comic focuses on the Riddler orchestrating a series of bombings and attacks throughout the city, attempting to kill many corrupt figures within Gotham. Johns and Frank's depiction of the Riddler in this book is reminiscent of both fictional serial killers like Jigsaw and real-world ones like the Zodiac Killer, comparisons which have also been made to Paul Dano's portrayal of the iconic villain in The Batman. Alongside this, 0 Year by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo seems to have influenced not only the film's depiction of the Riddler, but also in how it approaches Batman's formative years. Published in 2013, this story followed up on the huge success of the pair's Court of Owls and Death of the Family arcs, and aimed to tell a modernised and new origin story for Batman as part of the New 52, retelling the first year of the hero's crime-fighting career and showcasing how Bruce Wayne truly becomes the iconic Batman. Much like Earth 1, the Riddler takes centre stage here as the main antagonist, with Snyder depicting him as the first real supervillain that Batman faces. Here, Riddler cuts off Gotham's power supply and floods the city, plunging it into an almost post-apocalyptic state. In order to save Gotham and restore law and order, Batman is forced to use his own heart to restore power using an electrode, quite literally becoming the beating heart of the city in order to rescue it from the brink of collapse. Throughout 0 Year, we see Bruce Wayne transform from an arrogant and emotionally vulnerable boy, still struggling to come to terms with the loss that he suffered as a child, to a fully formed and realised superhero. Although The Batman appears to be a very dark retelling of the character's origin, and a departure from Snyder and Capullo's vibrant and at times psychedelic depiction of Batman's early years, I do believe that a similar approach to 0 Year has been used by Matt Reeves and his team. I think one aspect of this comic that will make its way into Reeves' depiction of the Caped Crusader is just how Batman evolved throughout the course of the story. Throughout the events of 0 Year, particularly through his battle with the Riddler, Bruce realises that Batman can exist as more than a symbol of anger and revenge, becoming the literal beating heart of Gotham City, and with the help of the friends and allies he makes throughout his early war on crime, Batman enables Gotham to rise from its ashes, as he guides the way to a better and brighter future. Having analysed and discussed all of these different Batman comics, I think it gives us a fair indication of the approach that Matt Reeves and the team behind The Batman have taken, in terms of their understanding of the character for this film and the direction that they might go in for future projects. Clearly, first and foremost, the filmmaker appears to have consulted a lot of murder mystery stories, eager to tap into the noir and detective aspects of the Caped Crusader. Books like The Long Halloween, Batman Shaman, and Year One all demonstrate the aspects of his character that make Bruce Wayne the world's greatest detective. And given that this is a facet of his character that hasn't been explored in enough detail on screen, it's understandable that Matt Reeves would seek to tell this type of story. The director appears to have borrowed elements from these beloved comic book adventures and combined them with thriller films such as Seven and Zodiac to create a chilling and enthralling Batman crime epic. Additionally, a common theme that runs through a lot of these different comics is the duality at the heart of Batman's character, and the symbolism of what his gothic persona represents. Considering that many of the stories we've looked at are set during either his first or second year as a crime fighter, it's evident that Reeves seeks to deconstruct Bruce Wayne at the beginning of his superhero career, and explore the deeper meaning of Batman as a concept. Many of the books cited as inspirations for the latest film do attempt to deconstruct Batman's persona in many different ways, ranging from trauma and Freudian-like psychology, as depicted in Darwin Cook's Ego, to mystical and religious imagery, as seen in Shaman. In addition, in terms of the film's more grounded and realistic tone, while Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is a definite source of influence, I actually think the world of Matt Reeves' Batman owes a lot to Jeff Johns and Gary Frank's Earth 1 comics, with the film's focus on Gotham's corrupt establishment and Batman becoming the first sign of change after years of depression, mirroring how the hero was presented in those graphic novels. One aspect of these books that I can definitely see informing future Batman films is how, in Earth 1, Bruce becomes Batman solely to seek vengeance on his parents' killers, believing that their deaths were the result of a grand conspiracy, and only through learning the truth that their deaths were a freak accident does Bruce transform Batman into being a genuine symbol of hope. The idea of Batman being a shining light in a city that's very much lost its way isn't exclusive to Earth 1, as comics like Zero Year and Year One also touch on this idea to an extent. However, I think it's in Johns and Frank's reimagining that it's perhaps best articulated, especially in a gritty yet realistic setting that isn't massively unfamiliar to the world that Matt Reeves has crafted. All in all though, I find it interesting to deep dive into all of these various comic books, which were published decades apart by many different celebrated writers and artists, and pick out the common themes that unite them, and by doing so we can begin to understand how Matt Reeves truly reads and perceives the Caped Crusader, and get a sense for the types of Batman stories that he desires to tell. The extent of these influences currently remain to be seen, but I believe that regardless, these comic books shine an exciting and intriguing light on what the future might hold for the Batman. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on everything we talked about in today's video. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notify bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you enjoyed this and you want some more videos, there should be some others on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you want to help support the channel and help me make more videos, you can do so over at patreon.com/OwenLikesComics. Or if you just want some more of me, you can follow me on Twitter, just at OwenLikesComics. But that's all for this video though. Again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you next time. But until then, take care and keep reading.